The desolate moon of Zalon stretched endlessly before her, a vast expanse of cracked earth and jagged mountains beneath a cold, unfeeling sky. Once, this world had been full of life, a paradise flourishing with flora and fauna. But years of war had ravaged its surface, leaving only barren wasteland. Now, Zalon served as a forgotten relic, ignored by the alien factions who had long since moved on. At the edge of a craggy cliff, a massive wolf-like creature huddled with her two cubs, their bodies pressed together for warmth. The howling winds cut through the canyon, carrying with them the chill of the unforgiving atmosphere. This was Narya, a genetically altered direwolf, once a weapon bred by the Galactic Order, designed for destruction. Her fur, once glossy and sleek, now looked matted and ragged, and her eyes, once glowing with intensity, were now dull with exhaustion. Narya had been abandoned here by those who created her. After the war on Terran ended, she and her cubs were left to perish in isolation, forgotten by those who had used her as nothing more than a tool. The harsh environment offered little hope. The cubs were too young to hunt and far too weak to survive on their own. The pack-based instincts that had once ensured their survival were now a distant memory. Narya's mournful howl echoed into the silent, empty landscape, but there was no reply. She lowered her head, her body shivering as the cold wind tore her fur, and looked to her cubs, one large enough to stand, the other barely able to keep its balance. They whimpered softly, their small bodies quivering with fear and hunger. The bleak reality of their situation was becoming too much for her to bear. But miles away, someone heard. Sergeant Elijah Turner, stationed at a remote observation post on Zalon, was going through his routine checks. His mission was simple: monitor for any signs of life, anything left over from the failed military operation that had once been here. His assignment on Zalon was to watch and wait until it was time to return to Earth, a return he was eager for, as the days had stretched on in dull monotony. That evening, as he studied the readings on his scanner, something unusual caught his attention, a faint rhythmic signal indicating life. It was an anomaly in this barren landscape. His curiosity piqued. Elijah adjusted the scanner and pinpointed the location. He followed the signal across the desolate terrain, careful and deliberate with each step. After a short trek, he crouched behind a rock, peering cautiously around the edge. In the pale glow of Zalon's twin moons, he spotted them, a towering wolf-like creature with two small cubs nestled against her, shivering in the harsh cold. Elijah's military training kicked in, and he instantly recognized the creature, a Zalonian direwolf, a genetically engineered species bred for battle. These creatures were known for their strength, intelligence, and ferocity in combat. But this wolf was different. Her frame was frail, her ribs visible under the thin layer of fur, and her once vibrant eyes were now dim with fatigue. Her cubs, small and vulnerable, huddled together, their tiny bodies trembling. Elijah's heart sank as he realized what had happened. This wolf, once an instrument of war, had been abandoned and left to die on a dead world. Slowly, he approached, making his presence known without startling her. Narya lifted her head, her eyes narrowing, and a low growl escaped her throat, but there was no aggression behind it, only fear and protectiveness. Elijah took a slow, deliberate step back to appear less threatening. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said softly, crouching down to her level. He carefully retrieved a small water bottle from his pack and placed it in front of him, retreating a few paces. The wolf hesitated, but, driven by the instinct to survive, she sniffed the bottle cautiously. After a moment of hesitation, she lowered her head and took a few tentative sips, her cubs following her lead. Elijah watched them quietly, his emotions a mixture of sorrow and resolve. These were creatures meant for destruction, but all he saw now was a mother fighting to keep her cubs alive in a world that no longer cared about them. He knew he couldn't just leave them here. They deserved more than this. As the wolf finished drinking, she glanced up at him, her eyes studying him with a wary but curious gaze. Elijah felt a wave of determination wash over him. His duty may have been to monitor this forsaken world, but he knew he couldn't walk away from this. He couldn't leave them to die. "I'll be back," he whispered, knowing the wolf wouldn't understand his words, but hoping she would understand his intentions. With that, he made his way back to his outpost, already planning how he could help. The next morning, Elijah gathered what supplies he could, ration bars, a second water bottle, and a few thermal blankets, and set out once more. As he neared the wolf's den, he moved with caution, hoping Narya would remember his peaceful intent. When he arrived, the wolf raised her head, her eyes watching him carefully. She didn't growl this time. Her cubs were nearby, but they didn't react with fear. Instead, they watched him with curiosity. Elijah set the supplies down at a safe distance, then backed away to give them space. He opened a ration bar and tossed a small piece toward them. The cubs hesitated, but the scent of the food reached them. One of them, a small ball of fur with bright eyes, ventured closer. Encouraged by Narya's silent approval, the cubs sniffed the food before taking a bite. Soon, the second cub followed, and the two devoured the food quickly, their hunger overriding any fear they might have had. Narya watched, her eyes softening as she observed her cubs eating. Elijah offered another piece, and this time, Narya herself took the food. Once a fierce weapon, she was now a mother, simply trying to survive and care for her young. Elijah remained there for hours, speaking softly to the trio, sharing his own story in low tones. He knew they couldn't understand the words, but they could sense his intentions. As the sun set, Narya allowed him to sit closer. Her body language relaxed, and the cubs, feeling their mother's shift, edged closer to him, their curiosity growing. That night, as the temperature dropped, Elijah wrapped himself in one of the thermal blankets and sat near the wolves, refusing to leave their side. Narya curled protectively around her cubs, glancing at him once before closing her eyes. Elijah didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't leaving them behind. The next morning, Narya's cubs were closer than ever, sniffing around his gear with a mix of curiosity and cautious trust. Narya observed from a short distance, her body language no longer defensive but rather calm. Elijah extended his hand toward the cubs, moving slowly to avoid startling them. The smaller cub, which he had started calling Nova because of her bright eyes, approached cautiously and nudged his fingers. Her sibling, whom he had nicknamed Shadow, hung back but watched intently. Elijah smiled softly, offering another piece of ration. Nova eagerly accepted it, munching with visible delight, while Shadow edged forward, sniffing his hand and finally accepting the food. Narya watched him with a low rumble of approval, a subtle sign of her growing trust. "You're not just a weapon, are you?" Elijah said softly, looking at Narya. "You're a mother, just like any other, doing everything you can to keep your cubs safe, and I'm going to help you do that." As the days passed, Elijah continued to visit, bringing food, water, and supplies. Each time, the bond between him and the wolves grew stronger. Narya's growls became less of a warning and more of a greeting. One day, Elijah took a deep breath and extended his hand toward her. She hesitated, watching him carefully, but after a moment, she lowered her head and allowed him to place his hand gently on her fur. It was a delicate, tentative touch, but the warmth of her fur and the steady rhythm of her breathing connected them in a way words never could. From that moment on, Elijah knew their bond was real. The once fierce and dangerous creature had begun to trust him, not only as a provider of food, but as a protector. Her once icy violet eyes softened slightly each time he approached, and she even allowed him to sit beside her, watching over her cubs. But Elijah knew this fragile peace couldn't last forever. His actions would soon be noticed by his superiors, and his care for the wolves was a clear violation of protocol, something that could not be ignored. He was a soldier, bound by orders and regulations. The higher-ups saw creatures like Narya as mere tools, bred for war and meant to be controlled. Yet, every time he saw the small cubs playing and tumbling at his feet in the fierce, devoted gaze of the mother, he knew he could never abandon them. No matter the consequences, no matter the orders, he would protect them. Days turned into weeks as Elijah continued his visits, ensuring that Narya and her cubs had enough to survive the harsh conditions of Zalon. Their bond deepened with each passing day. The cubs grew bolder, playfully pawing at his boots and nudging his hands for scraps, while Narya no longer regarded him with suspicion. She lay nearby, her gaze protective, as if she'd come to accept him as part of their pack. But Elijah could feel the tension growing. His superiors were beginning to notice the extended patrols and the extra rations he'd been consuming. Though they hadn't yet confronted him, he could sense it was only a matter of time before someone would demand an explanation. One cold evening, as he sat with Narya and the cubs beneath the soft light of Zaylon's twin moons, the harsh reality hit him. He couldn't leave them to fend for themselves. Zaylon was too brutal, and without him, they wouldn't survive. If he was going to protect them, he would need a long-term plan. The only real chance they had was relocation. There was a sanctuary planet, Maris, that accepted endangered or abandoned species. It was far away, and getting the necessary clearance would be nearly impossible, but it was the only hope for Narya and her cubs. That night, Elijah sent a discreet message to Dr. Leah Johnson, an old friend and xenobiologist dedicated to preservation of alien species. She had always fought for animal rights, and if anyone could help, it was her. The next day, a reply came through. "Elijah, are you out of your mind?" Her message began, filled with concern but ending on a hopeful note. "But you know I can't resist challenge. I'll bring the equipment, but this has to be off the record. Command won't just ignore this." They made plans for Dr. Johnson to arrive under the guise of a routine medical check. She landed in a small, unmarked shuttle, keeping her presence discreet. When she first saw the wolves, her reaction was immediate. "They're incredible," she whispered, approaching cautiously. "I've read about Zaylon direwolves, but seeing them up close—" Narya eyed her warily, but sensing Elijah's calm, she allowed the doctor to approach. The cubs, always curious, sniffed at Dr. Johnson's hand, their noses twitching as they took in her scent. Dr. Johnson's face softened, and she turned to Elijah, her voice a mix of admiration and concern. "You did the right thing. These creatures deserve a chance at life beyond this wasteland." With her help, they prepared for the move. Dr. Johnson administered a mild sedative to Narya and the cubs to keep them calm during the journey. They carefully loaded the wolves into a reinforced transport compartment, equipped with comfortable bedding, food, and water. But just as they were finishing, Elijah's communicator beeped urgently. Command had detected unauthorized activity in his sector. "They know," he muttered under his breath, his pulse quickening. "We need to go. Now." They quickly boarded the ship, and Elijah took the controls while Dr. Johnson handled communications, inputting false coordinates to throw off any pursuers. The ship's engines roared to life as they shot into the sky, speeding away from Zaylon. But Command wasn't giving up that easily. Within minutes, a patrol ship appeared on their radar, closing in fast. "They won't stop," Dr. Johnson said, her voice tense. "We can't outrun them at this rate." Elijah gritted his teeth, maneuvering the ship toward a dense asteroid field. "Hold on," he said, determination in his voice. "We're going through." Dr. Johnson's eyes widened in disbelief. "That's insane." But Elijah was resolute. He expertly navigated the ship to the maze of asteroids, using debris as cover, forcing the patrol ship to slow down to avoid collisions. Narya, still groggy from the sedative, lifted her head and let out a soft growl, as if sensing Elijah's unwavering resolve. After what felt like an eternity, they finally broke free from the asteroid field. The patrol ship was lost behind them. Both Elijah and Dr. Johnson exhaled in relief, and she managed a shaky laugh. "I'll never doubt your piloting skills again," she said. "Neither will I," Elijah replied with a grin, though his heart was still pounding in his chest. He glanced back at Narya and the cubs, who were slowly waking from their stupor. They were safe, for now, but the journey wasn't over. As they made their way toward Maris, Elijah felt a deep sense of pride in what they had accomplished. Together, they had defied the odds. No matter what challenges lay ahead, he was ready to face them. Narya, Shadow, and Star would have the life they deserved. The journey was far from over, though. Command was not going to let Elijah's actions go unnoticed, especially now that he had taken the Zaylon direwolves under his care. Within hours of leaving Zaylon, Dr. Johnson's sensors detected another patrol ship trailing them. The chase wasn't over. "We won't lose them this time," Dr. Johnson warned, her fingers dancing over the control panel as she assessed their options. Elijah checked the navigation screen. They were nearing the nebular rift, a dense and confusing region that could scramble their systems if they weren't careful. But it was their only chance. "We'll go through," Elijah decided, his voice steady. "It's risky, but they'll have a hard time tracking us in there." Dr. Johnson's eyes widened. "Elijah, that's borderline suicidal." He glanced back at the cargo hold, where Narya lay protectively over her cubs, watching him with a fierce trust. "They trusted me to protect them," he said quietly, meeting Dr. Johnson's gaze. "I'm not letting them down now." With a reluctant nod, Dr. Johnson adjusted their course, and the ship shot into the nebular rift. Clouds of vibrant gas swirled around them, hues of pink and violet glowing with bursts of energy. As they entered the thickest part, the ship's sensors went haywire, blinking erratically and buzzing with interference. Visibility was nearly zero, and Elijah had to rely on instinct and Dr. Johnson's careful guidance to navigate. They slowed, moving cautiously through the clouds, hoping the patrol would lose their trail. For tense minutes, the only sound was the soft hum of the engines. In the cargo hold, Narya remained still, her ears twitching as if aware of the danger around them. Star whimpered softly, huddling close to her mother, while Shadow remained on alert, his sharp eyes fixed on Elijah. Finally, the patrol ship signal faded from their radar. "We lost them," Dr. Johnson whispered, relief flooding her voice. Elijah exhaled slowly, his hands trembling slightly as he adjusted their course. "Let's keep moving, just in case they pick up our trail again." As they left the nebula, the stars cleared before them, and a calm settled over the ship. They had finally evaded the pursuit. For now, Elijah leaned back in his seat, feeling the weight of the journey lift, replaced by a fierce pride. They were closer to safety, closer to the future they all deserved. Dr. Johnson glanced at him, a smile tugging at her lips. "You did it, Elijah. We're almost there." Elijah looked back at Narya, who let out a soft, grateful rumble. Her eyes, still fierce, softened with trust. They were one step closer to a new beginning. But even as they neared their destination, Elijah knew the real battle was far from over. The Galactic Union Council had already caught wind of his actions, and an official message soon arrived, summoning him for a formal hearing to account for his disobedience and unauthorized actions. The fate of Narya and her cubs would hang in the balance. Upon their arrival at Maris, Elijah and Dr. Johnson were escorted to the council chambers, where officials from various species awaited them. The story of the direwolves had sparked a heated debate across the galaxy, with some calling Elijah a hero who had saved innocent creatures from abandonment. Others saw him as nothing more than a criminal, violating the very laws that govern their galaxy, while some saw Elijah as reckless, putting lives in jeopardy by introducing a potentially dangerous species into a sanctuary. The council chamber was filled with spectators, reporters, and officials. At the front, a tall, severe-looking council member named Rigger, with piercing silver eyes and a commanding presence, addressed him directly. "Sergeant Turner," Rigger began, his voice echoing through the room, "you stand accused of disobeying direct orders, compromising the mission's integrity, and transporting unclassified alien life forms without authorization. What do you have to say for yourself?" Elijah took a deep breath, meeting Rigger's cold gaze with unwavering conviction. "Narya and her cubs are not just unclassified life forms," he said. "They are intelligent, loyal, and capable of trust. The Galactic League abandoned them on Zalon after using them as weapons. They deserve more than that. They deserve a chance to live." A murmur swept through the audience, and Rigger's eyes narrowed. "You place your personal feelings above protocol. How can we trust that these creatures are not a threat to others?" At that moment, Dr. Leah Johnson, the xenobiologist who had aided Elijah, stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "I've studied alien species for years. I can attest to the Zalon direwolf's capacity for loyalty and social bonding. They were dangerous only because they were treated as tools of war. Elijah saw them for what they truly are, more than weapons. An elder from the empathetic Kravian species, who had been observing proceedings thoughtfully, raised her hand to speak. "Sergeant Turner, you claim these creatures are capable of trust. How did you come to that conclusion?" Elijah recounted his time with Narya and her cubs on Zalon, explaining how Narya had protected her cubs with devotion he had never seen before. "She trusted me because I showed her respect," he said. "She protected me just as much as I protected her and her cubs. A mother will always fight for her family, no matter the odds." The Kravian elder nodded thoughtfully, while the rest of the council exchanged looks, clearly moved by his words. But Rigger remained impassive. "While your account is compelling," he said, "this council must prioritize safety above all else. These creatures are unlike anything we've encountered in the galaxy. The risk they pose cannot be overlooked." Just as the room grew tense, a young xenobiologist from the audience spoke up. "Counselors," she said, "if we deny these creatures a chance at freedom, we deny the galaxy the opportunity to expand its understanding of sentient life. They deserve to be seen for what they truly are, not judged solely by their origins." Applause rippled through the crowd, and others echoed the sentiment, calling for the council to reconsider. After a long pause, Rigger raised his hand, signaling for silence. The council would deliberate. Elijah and Dr. Johnson waited in intense silence as the council members discussed behind closed doors. Finally, they returned, and Rigger addressed the chamber once more. "After careful consideration, we have reached a decision," Rigger said. "Sergeant Elijah Turner, you will not face disciplinary action. Furthermore, Narya and her cubs will be granted asylum on Maris under the oversight of the Galactic Preservation Society. This arrangement will be reviewed annually, with the hope that it sets a new precedent for how sentient beings are treated, regardless of their origins." The chamber erupted in cheers, and Elijah felt an overwhelming wave of relief wash over him. Narya, Shadow, and Star were free, and their story had sparked a movement toward compassion across the galaxy. As Elijah and Dr. Johnson left the council chamber, a crowd gathered to thank them. Elijah realized that his actions had inspired a change far greater than he had ever imagined. The wolves he had saved were no longer just survivors. They had become symbols of a new era, one in which even the most dangerous creatures had a chance to live in peace. With the council's decision in place, Narya and her cubs were granted official asylum on Maris, where vast natural sanctuaries offered them the freedom to live as they pleased. Elijah accompanied them to their new home, guiding them through the sprawling grasslands, lush forests, and winding rivers that stretched across the sanctuary planet. Narya's eyes sparkled with a mix of curiosity and cautious excitement as she explored her new territory, while the cubs, now more confident than ever, wrestled and chased each other through the tall grass. For the first time since he'd found them, they were no longer fighting for survival. They were simply living. Narya, once a fierce protector, began to relax. Her sharp gaze softened as she took in the peaceful surroundings of Maris. Dr. Johnson stayed on Maris to help Elijah adjust the wolves to their new environment. She had prepared a space within the sanctuary where visitors could observe Narya and her cubs from a respectful distance, hoping their story would inspire a new appreciation for the complexities of alien life. One evening, as the sun set in streaks of red and gold, Elijah sat with Dr. Johnson on a hill overlooking the sanctuary. They watched as Narya nudged her cubs playfully, showing them how to hunt in the safer, prey-filled terrain. The wolves were thriving, and Elijah's heart swelled with pride. "You know, I never imagined things would turn out like this," Elijah said, a trace of wonder in his voice. "When I found them on Zalon, all I wanted was to give them a chance to survive. I never expected to be part of something so much bigger." Dr. Johnson nodded, her gaze warm. "What you did, Elijah, wasn't just about saving Narya and her cubs. You changed how the galaxy sees them, and creatures like them. You gave the council a reason to reconsider their own biases." They sat in comfortable silence, watching as Shadow and Star curled up beside their mother, drifting off to sleep under the vast, star-filled sky. Elijah felt a deep sense of peace settle over him. He had come to Zalon as a soldier, trained to follow orders, but he was leaving Maris as something much more, a guardian and advocate for beings once deemed unworthy of compassion. The story of Narya, Shadow, and Star spread quickly across the galaxy, becoming symbols of resilience, loyalty, and the importance of second chances. Beings from countless species visited Maris, drawn by the story of the human soldier who had defied protocol to protect a family of alien wolves. People from all walks of life gathered at the sanctuary, learning not only about the Zalon direwolves, but also about compassion and coexistence. Elijah and Dr. Johnson co-founded the Galactic Guardians Initiative, dedicated to advocating for the rights of alien creatures and preserving endangered species across the galaxy. They were invited to intergalactic summits, conferences, and schools, where they shared the story of Narya and her cubs, inspiring others to consider the value of all life, regardless of its origins. On Maris, the sanctuary expanded, opening more habitats for abandoned and endangered creatures. Visitors marveled at Narya's regal presence, Shadow's cautious curiosity, and Star's playful antics. The wolves were no longer seen as weapons. They were beings with emotions, intelligence, and a capacity for connection. One day, a young boy visiting from a neighboring star system approached Elijah, his eyes wide with excitement. "Is it true, Sergeant Turner?" he asked. "Did you really save them all by yourself?" Elijah smiled, kneeling to meet the boy's gaze. "I didn't save them alone," he said. "They saved me, too. They taught me that bravery isn't just about fighting. It's about standing up for those who can't protect themselves. And they showed me that sometimes family is more than just who you're born with. It's who you fight for." The boy, mesmerized, looked over at Narya and her cubs, lounging peacefully in the grass, their bond as strong as ever. That evening, as the stars glittered above the sanctuary, Elijah and Dr. Johnson took one last stroll through the sanctuary grounds. They watched as Narya lifted her head, her eyes reflecting the starlight, and let out a long, proud howl, a sound of freedom and strength that echoed across the land. Shadow and Star joined in, their voices blending with their mother's in a harmonious call. Dr. Johnson leaned closer to Elijah, her voice soft. "You did something remarkable, Elijah. You showed the galaxy what it means to be truly courageous." Elijah smiled, his gaze on Narya and her cubs. "We all have a duty to protect what's vulnerable, to stand by those who need it. I may have started this journey for Narya, but now I'm here for every creature like her." As they walked back toward the sanctuary's entrance, Elijah felt an overwhelming sense of purpose. The wolves he had saved had given him a reason to fight for more than just himself, to work toward a future where every life, regardless of how dangerous or different, could be seen as worthy. Together, Elijah, Dr. Johnson, Narya, Shadow, and Star had forged a legacy, one that would inspire generations to come. They were no longer just a soldier, a scientist, and a family of alien wolves. They were guardians of the forgotten, champions of compassion, and pioneers of a future where empathy reached beyond the stars.